Good evening, or morning, or day, or night, wherever you are in the world. Hello, this is Flake, and I've got another top 5 list for you. Again, we're going to dig more into beta because there's a lot of interesting elements from beta that a lot of people might not know about. And I wanted to touch upon, this time, some of the more intriguing features from beta. Not necessarily cards or abilities, but rather some of the little subtle rules or features or elements of the game that haven't necessarily survived from beta through to homecoming until the main game launch, however, are still pretty fun and intriguing to sort of look back on. So here are the top 5 intriguing features from beta. At number 5, we're talking about boosting and the remaining boosts that go through from round to round. The boosts that don't necessarily reset when you go from round to round. Now, this really only affects resilient units, obviously, because they're the only ones that can really survive from one round to the next. Now, the old school way to do this was the fact that boosts actually stayed on the unit when it went from one round to the other. So typically, you could usually just line up a whole bunch of resilient units, boost the hell out of them, and then watch and laugh as your opponents struggle to deal with it as you drive past round 2 against a massive board that you've basically just built up in the previous rounds. Now, boosts remaining is no longer a thing in Homecoming Gwent, in the new, well, I'd say it's not new anymore, but the current version of Gwent. Typically, the boosts are going to be reset. Status everything is kind of gone when you go from one round to the next, and the resilience is also scrubbed away. But that is certainly one thing that has not survived, and it's an intriguing thing from beta. At number 4, speaking of resilience, there was a subtle way that you can kind of create some sort of resilience without actually creating resilience. There was a time back in beta where Deathwish triggers would actually happen when the round ended. The logic behind this, I guess, is the fact that everything on the board would die when the round went from round 1 to 2 or 2 to 3, for that matter. So the death wishes would actually occur. Now, the weird part about this is that if you had a death wish that would spawn units, you would have those units in the following round. So there was really an interesting sort of workaround if you were monsters, where you drop a harpy that would drop eggs, that would drop more harpies, or a Dow, or anything, frankly, that would spawn more bodies when they died, would really put you in a great position into the next round. And if your opponent would happen to kill those units or lock those units, okay, that's one thing, but killing them would spawn those units, which was usually negative value, and locking them is oftentimes just a waste of a lock. And how are you going to lock so many of these Deathwish units? And Deathwish triggers going on to the next round is something that we don't have in this version of Gwent, but it was certainly something that monster players took a lot of advantage of in order to maintain a lot of round presence and really effectuating a very awesome bleed in round 2, when at the end of the round, all of those death wishes would trigger and giving you a lot of presence. And that's something we don't have anymore. At number 3 is the demotion of cards. This is such an odd thing to dive into. Now, thinking back to beta, there were 3 classifications of cards. There was 4 gold cards, 6 silver cards, and the rest were all bronzes. And only 1 copy of each gold and 1 copy of each silver, and up to 3 copies of any bronze. But the thing about it is that mixed in with gold immunity, you could not really interact with a lot of cards. It was hard because they were gold and they were therefore powerful, and for the most part they were uninteractable. They were relatively immune to most of the nonsense that you can throw at them. However, there were cards like Dimeridium Shackles that was able to actually demote a card, and if you can demote, you can also promote, which is a whole archetype in itself. Henselt Promote in Northern Realms might bring back some memories for some, but demoting cards into silver was used for a lot of people as a lock, first and foremost, as Dimeridium Shackles would lock a card, but if that card became unlocked, you can then deal damage to it, and that was definitely one way that you can deal with those gold cards that were pesky. But for the other part, sometimes demoting your own gold unit so that you can bring it back with a resurrection type card was an interesting way to use that card, proactively on your own side. But nonetheless, demoting cards, as odd of a concept as that may seem, was something that was prevalent in Beta Gwent. At number 2, We're going to talk about locks staying in the graveyard, and this is an odd one as well, but it's something that I think a lot of people would actually maybe appreciate now, but upon further reflection, as cool as it sounds, it would probably ruin a lot of stuff out there today. Now, you lock a card, it stays on the board, the game text is canceled, any of its abilities don't work anymore. We all know and love how locks work. Nilfgaard thrives on this nonsense, but still, locks would follow that card into the graveyard. That sounds, a little bit odd, but there were cards that would potentially actually get you some value out of the graveyard. Be it, locking a card, therefore it will not get veteran status and not grow in the graveyard. Cards that would come back from the graveyard. Locking a boat, let's say, a Flying Redanian, would mean that the game's text is canceled, so it would not come out. That lock used to follow the card through to the graveyard, and it was locked forever unless you unlocked it somehow, which is odd enough to think about. Why would you unlock something in the graveyard? Well, how could you even? But still, it was a facet of the game that no longer exists. And if we think about it deeply, I wonder how that would affect the game right now. But the fact that it's not here, I don't have to worry about that. All right, and number 1, it's the Mulligan Blacklisting. This is an intriguing one as well because Mulligan Blacklisting was something that people kind of figured out on their own to a degree, and it became a very high-level element to improving your gameplay, knowing not just what cards to mulligan, but in what order to mulligan them. Basically, the way that blacklisting in mulligans went was the fact that if you mulliganed a card, if you clicked on it as if you wanted to mulligan it away, it would not reappear in your mulligan draws, nor would any of the copies of that card ever come back as a mulligan. So no worries about bricking certain cards if you mulliganed a copy away from it. Mulligan Blacklisting was something that eventually was, common knowledge, but for those who really were in tune with this strategy early on, it really gave them a leg up when it came to digging through their decks and making sure that they weren't drawing dead later on. Now, the Gwent did have a major tutor problem, I will say, wherein every card had a tutor, and it was a tutor-trained fiesta for a while, but still, that kind of reliability in terms of card draw could even be further refined by understanding and proper utilization of the Mulligan Blacklist. So there you have it, friends. That is 5 intriguing features from beta that didn't really follow into the game. Again, these are not necessarily rules or cards or abilities, so to speak, but it's something that it's fun to look back on. If you have any others that you're thinking about that I may have missed, any cool features from beta. Now, I have thought about the passive abilities, but to me, that is an ability, and I tried not to do anything with card abilities.